I never told my daughter about the hidden compartment beneath Eleanor's anniversary clock. When she started meeting with the man she'd been cheating with, every word they spoke inside my workshop was already being captured. One evening, I was in the back room cataloging a shipment of movement parts when I heard the front door open. My daughter walked in with him. She thought I was gone for the night. She was wrong. I'd been waiting for exactly this moment, and what I heard in the next 4 minutes changed everything. Thank you for being here. Before I tell you what happened that evening, please comment the word steady if you believe that real love sometimes means protecting someone from the worst version of themselves. One quick note, this story draws from real experiences, but uses certain fictional elements to protect privacy. The lessons are true. The message is true. That is what matters. There is a particular kind of patience that clock repair teaches you. Every movement has hundreds of parts, and most people who bring in a broken clock want to know the same thing. How long will it take? The honest answer is always the same. As long as it needs. You cannot rush a restoration. You cannot force gears that aren't ready to mesh. You pull the mechanism apart, lay every wheel and pinion on the felt mat, and you examine each one under magnification. You find the damage. You understand it completely. And only then do you begin. My name is George Whitfield. I am 64 years old. I have been repairing antique clocks in Savannah, Georgia for 37 years. And I learned almost everything I know from my wife. Eleanor found the shop first. We were 26 and newly married, walking down Bull Street on a Sunday afternoon in October, when she stopped in front of a dusty storefront between a florist and a dry goods store. The sign in the window said Ridley Clock Works Repairs and Restorations. She pressed her nose against the glass like a child at a bakery. I remember the light catching the side of her face. We went inside. Old Mr. Ridley was behind the counter, loop in his eye, bent over a carriage clock from the 1880s. Eleanor asked him questions for 45 minutes. I stood beside her quietly, watching her fall in love with something I didn't yet understand. 3 years later, Mr. Ridley retired and sold us the shop for far less than it was worth. He said he wanted it to go to someone who would love it properly. He looked at Eleanor when he said it. She renamed it Whitfield Clockworks. We rebuilt it together, refinished the floors, replaced the display cases, sourced inventory from estate sales across the southeast. She had an instinct for finding damaged pieces that other dealers walked past. She'd pick up a tarnished bracket clock with a seized movement, turn it over in her hands and say, "George, someone is waiting to hear this tick again." She was always right. Eleanor was the soul of that shop. I was the hands. She understood what something was worth beyond its price. I learned to use the tools. Between us, we built something that lasted. That is what I believed for 30 years. Until I discovered that the thing threatening to destroy what we'd built wasn't a flood or a fire or the economy. It was the daughter we'd raised together. Eleanor passed 14 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in the spring, gone by November. She was 51. Our daughter was 17, a junior at Savannah Arts Academy, and she took it the way teenagers take catastrophic loss, loudly at first, then completely silent. She stopped playing the piano. She stopped calling her friends. For 2 years, she moved through our house like a ghost, wearing her own face. I buried myself in the shop. It was the only language I had. In the last weeks, when the hospice nurses came and the house smelled of antiseptic and lavender, Eleanor asked me to bring her something from the workshop. Her anniversary clock, a French 400-day piece from the 1920s with a glass dome and a brass pendulum that rotated slowly beneath it. We had restored it together in our first year of marriage. It sat in its place of honor on the shelf above my workbench, and I had never once considered selling it. I carried it upstairs and set it on the nightstand beside her. "Keep this safe," she told me. Her voice was thin, but her eyes were clear. "Eleanor, that clock is yours. Not anymore." She touched the glass dome with one finger. "There's something inside it for you, for when you need it." She paused. "You'll understand when the time comes, George. Trust me." I thought she meant the clockwork itself, that it would comfort me after she was gone. The rhythm of it. I was wrong about what she meant. It took 14 years and my daughter's betrayal, to understand the gift Eleanor had actually left me. Our daughter was 20 when Eleanor died. By 28, she seemed, from the outside, to have become someone her mother would have been proud of. She had a business degree from the University of Georgia, a solid position as an operations manager at a wealth management firm downtown, and a husband, my son-in-law, Marcus, who was 30 and worked as a structural engineer for a firm that did restoration projects on Savannah's historic buildings. I liked Marcus. He reminded me of the kind of man I had tried to be at his age. Patient, honest. The type who showed up early and stayed late and meant what he said. For 2 years after their wedding, I watched them together and felt the tension I had carried since Eleanor's death begin to ease. My daughter would bring Marcus to the shop on Sunday afternoons, and he would stand in the display room reading the tags on the tall case clocks, genuinely curious, asking the kind of questions that showed he was actually listening to my answers. He had respect for old things. That told me something important about a person. Then, in the late spring of her 29th year, something shifted. It started with the visits. My daughter had come to the shop every Sunday for years, no matter how busy she was. She'd bring coffee from the cafe 2 doors down, sit on the stool beside my workbench, and talk while I worked. She talked about Marcus, about their plans to buy a house in the Victorian district, about her coworkers, about small, ordinary things. I didn't always contribute much. I am not a man of many words, but I listened, and she knew it, and it was enough. In May, the Sunday visits began to fall away. 1 week became 2 weeks, became a month. When I called, she was warm but distracted. The conversation would wander toward logistics. Had I updated my insurance? Was the building properly covered? Had I thought about whether the inventory was appraised at current market value? Reasonable questions from a daughter in the wealth management business, I told myself. Practical. She was looking out for me, but the questions kept coming, sharpened each time, aimed slightly differently. Dad, what does a building like this go for on Bull Street these days? Dad, have you updated your beneficiary designations recently? Dad, you work so many hours in that basement. Is the ventilation down there adequate? That last one landed differently. I stood at my workbench after she'd left that afternoon and turned the question over in my mind like a movement I couldn't quite diagnose. Then came the name. His name was Tyler Webb. My daughter mentioned him for the first time in July, in passing. The way you mention someone whose presence has already become ordinary. She'd hired him as a junior financial advisor at her firm the previous quarter. He was 27, she said. Bright kid, ambitious. Good instincts for client relationships. She was mentoring him. Over the next 6 weeks, Tyler Webb became a fixture in her conversation. Tyler had suggested a new portfolio approach for their biggest client. Tyler had stayed late every night that week to prepare a presentation. Tyler thought she should push for a VP title at her next review. The attention she paid to his opinions was disproportionate. I noticed, and I set it aside, and I noticed it again. In September, she brought him to the shop. She called ahead, said he was interested in antique timepieces, hoped I didn't mind. I said, of course not. I wanted to see him. He arrived dressed the way young men dress when they want to project seriousness. Dark chinos, pressed shirt, expensive shoes, handsome in a careful way. His handshake was practiced and firm. He called me sir twice in the first minute. He moved through the shop the way a surveyor moves through a property. He looked at the display cases, at the ceiling moldings, at the wide plank floors, at the bay window facing Bull Street. He asked intelligent questions about the inventory, but his eyes were doing different work. When he thought I was focused on demonstrating the movement of a Viennese regulator, I watched his gaze slide to the crown molding, to the back hallway, to the stairs leading to the basement workshop. He wasn't looking at clocks. He was assessing the building. My daughter watched him the entire visit. Not me, him. When he complimented the restoration work on a Biedermeier mantel clock, she lit up like he'd said something profound. On the way out, they walked to his car together. They didn't touch, but they walked close, and the comfort between them was not the comfort of colleagues. 2 days later, my daughter called and asked if I'd considered selling. I told her I had not. She gave me a figure. A developer she knew had been buying up historic commercial properties on Bull Street. She said the number casually. The way you mentioned the weather. Then, she said Tyler had introduced her to this developer at a dinner last week. I thanked her for thinking of me. I said I wasn't interested. After I hung up, I sat in the basement for a long time, and I understood that whatever was happening, it had already been in motion for longer than I knew. I called my attorney, Patrick O'Brien, the following Monday. Patrick had handled Eleanor's estate, drafted my will, managed the trust she had established for our daughter. I told him I wanted to review everything. He asked what had changed. I told him I wasn't sure yet, but I needed to be prepared. He told me to come in the following afternoon. At his office on Drayton Street, I outlined what I'd observed. Not accusations, patterns, the questions about my finances, the visit with the calculating young man, the sudden interest in selling a building I had never once indicated any desire to part with. Patrick listened without expression. When I finished, he said, "George, if your instinct is telling you something is wrong, your instinct is right. Let's protect the estate now, before there's a problem." We updated the will. We restructured the trust. We added conditions Eleanor had anticipated but never made explicit, that the inheritance was contingent on good character and the absence of undue influence. Patrick drafted language that a judge would understand, and he said something I wrote down when I got home. Document everything. Dates, times, exact words. If this ever goes to court, a contemporaneous record is worth more than any testimony. That same week, I installed 3 small cameras in the shop, one in the display room, one in the back hallway, and one in the workshop. Ruth, my shop manager who had worked with me for 22 years, was the only person I told. She looked at me for a moment and said, "I've been waiting for you to do something." I asked her what she meant. She said she'd been watching my daughter's visits for months. The questions, the way she photographed the workshop on her phone when she thought Ruth wasn't paying attention. She'd said nothing because it wasn't her place, but she was glad I was finally paying attention. I started keeping a notebook. Every conversation, every date, every exchange I could reconstruct. It felt like the worst kind of work I'd ever done, and I did it carefully, because Eleanor had taught me that precision was not optional when something mattered. My son-in-law called me in October. He wanted to talk in person. He arrived at the shop after closing, and when I saw his face, I understood that he was living inside the same fog of doubt I had watched a good man navigate before. We went downstairs. I poured coffee. He sat across from my workbench and stared at the cup. He told me my daughter had been working late 3 and 4 nights a week for the past 2 months. He told me she'd changed her phone password. He told me she'd started coming home smelling of a cologne that wasn't his. He said the worst part wasn't the suspicion. The worst part was that when he raised it gently, she turned it back on him. Said he was anxious. Said he needed therapy. Said she was exhausted by his insecurity. She made me feel like I was losing my mind, he said. And then she'd be kind for a few days, and I'd think maybe I was wrong, and then it would start again. I knew the name he was circling. I let him arrive at it himself. "Is it Tyler?" he asked finally. I told him what I had observed. I told him about the visit to the shop, about the building assessment, about the selling conversation. I did not tell him about the cameras or the notebook. Not yet. But I told him enough. Then I told him the part I had not wanted to say. "She has been asking me questions about this building, about my estate, about my insurance questions that aren't about caring for me. Marcus, I think she may be planning something that involves more than an affair." He stared at me. "How much more? I don't know yet. But I need evidence before I act. Real evidence. And I'm going to get it." I asked him not to confront her. I told him that confrontation now would only cause her to cover her tracks. He sat with that for a long time. Then he nodded. Slowly. The way a man nods when he agrees to something that costs him something. He left that night, still married and already alone. I locked up the shop and went back downstairs and wrote 4 pages in the notebook. The following week, I hired an investigator. His name was Carl Digges, retired Chatham County detective. 30 years on the job. I'd known him peripherally for years. He'd brought a grandfather clock to the shop twice for service. He was thorough and discreet, and he didn't ask questions I hadn't already answered. I gave him what I had. He gave me what I couldn't get myself. Within 3 weeks, Carl confirmed that my daughter and Tyler Webb had been meeting regularly at a short-term rental apartment in the Starland district. He had photographs, timestamps, receipts charged to a credit card in both their names. He had a partial audio from one meeting, captured legally in a shared space. On it, Tyler's voice. "So, what's the timeline looking like?" My daughter's voice, flat and businesslike. "Honestly, he's healthy. Could be years. Years." He didn't hide the frustration. "I know. But if we move too fast on the building, he'll get suspicious. And I need the trust fund intact. If he changes the will, has he?" A pause. "I don't know. That's what worries me." Carl delivered the file on a Thursday afternoon. I sat in my basement workshop with the folder on my lap for a long time after he left. The clock above my bench ticked. The anniversary clock on the upper shelf, Eleanor's clock, rotated slowly beneath its glass dome. I thought about what Eleanor had told me in those final weeks. "There's something inside it for you, for when you need it." I had assumed she meant comfort. I understood now that she had meant something more specific. I went to the shelf and carefully lifted the glass dome from the anniversary clock. I examined the base, the way I had 1,000 times, without truly looking. And there, beneath the velvet pad that covered the wooden base, I found a seam I had never noticed, a 1/4-inch gap along the back edge. I pressed the 2 rear corners simultaneously. The panel released. Inside was a folded letter in Eleanor's handwriting, dated 3 months before she died. "George, I need you to use this clock. The base can hold what needs to be held. I've watched her for years, and I love her completely. But I know what she's capable of when fear gets the better of her. She is going to need to be protected from herself. You will know what to do. You always do. Don't wait too long. And don't face this alone. Eleanor." I sat on the floor of my workshop with that letter in my hands. She had known. She had seen it coming. 14 years before it arrived. She had handed me a tool I didn't understand until the exact moment I needed it. I spent the next 3 evenings preparing the clock's hidden compartment. Inside, sealed in a small waterproof case, I placed the following: a copy of the updated will and trust documents, Carl's investigative file with photographs and timestamps, the partial audio recording from the Starland apartment, my attorney's signed summary of the estate protections in place, and a handwritten letter to my son-in-law. Then I placed a small digital recorder in the base as well, voice activated, and closed the panel. I set the clock back on its shelf. Anyone who didn't know what they were looking for would see only an antique anniversary clock under a glass dome, slowly turning. I was ready. On a Tuesday evening in mid-November, I told Ruth I was leaving early to attend a planning meeting for the Historical Preservation Society. This was true. What I did not tell her was that I had arranged for the meeting to end within 20 minutes so that I could circle back and enter the shop through the alley door, which I had deliberately left unlocked. I had learned from Carl's surveillance that my daughter and Tyler had been using Sunday evenings when the shop was closed. I had changed my pattern to give them a different window, and I had made sure, through a carefully casual phone call, that my daughter knew I would be occupied Tuesday evening. I came back through the alley at 7:30. The lights in the basement were on. I moved down the hallway and stopped outside the workshop door, which was open 3 inches. Tyler's voice first. "I need you to understand that I can't keep waiting indefinitely. I have a job offer in Charlotte. I told them I'd give an answer by January. My daughter..." "I know. So what are we doing here? What's the actual plan?" A pause. Then her voice, quiet and precise. "He's not going to sell voluntarily, but he doesn't need to. If something happens, a health event, an accident, the estate transfers automatically. Marcus gets nothing once the divorce is final. The trust comes to me. The building comes to me. At current market value, we're looking at 2.8 million, maybe 3. Something happens." Tyler's voice had an edge I didn't like. "That's a strange way to put it. I'm being realistic. He's 64. He works in a basement with chemical solvents. He has mild hypertension. He doesn't sleep enough. These things accumulate. Silence. Rachel, he started. Don't. Her voice was sharp. Don't act like you haven't thought about it too. I had heard enough. I stepped back from the door, went back up the stairs, and left through the alley the same way I'd come. I drove around for 30 minutes before my hands stopped shaking. Then I called Patrick. I told him what I had heard. He was quiet for a long moment. George, he said, you need to come in tomorrow morning, and you need to bring everything. The dinner was my daughter's idea, which pleased me. I had planted the seed in a phone call 2 weeks later, mentioned, casually, that I had been speaking with Patrick about estate updates, that I thought it was time for a family conversation. She responded with an eagerness that would have been invisible to anyone who didn't know what I knew. She suggested the old pink house, private dining, historic setting, the kind of restaurant where you celebrate things. She made the reservation herself. I asked that Marcus be included. She agreed without hesitation, which told me she believed the marriage was already irrelevant. Marcus called me the night before. George, whatever you're planning, tell me one thing. I'll tell you whatever you need. Is it over after tomorrow? Yes, I said. One way or another, it's over. He was quiet for a moment. I'll be there. I arrived at the restaurant early. The private dining room was on the second floor, 3 tall windows overlooking Reynolds Square. White tablecloths, candlelight, the smell of wax and old wood. I set my leather bag on the chair beside me and waited. My daughter arrived with Tyler. She had not told me she was bringing him. She introduced him smoothly, said he was joining them as her business advisor, that she thought it would be useful to have someone who understood estate planning in the room. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Marcus arrived 2 minutes later. He looked at Tyler, looked at me, and sat down without a word. We ordered. My daughter made conversation about the restaurant, about the building's history, about a preservation project Marcus's firm had recently completed. She was excellent at surfaces. She had learned that from Eleanor and used it for entirely different purposes. Midway through the appetizers, she set down her fork. Dad, you mentioned the estate. I think we're all ready to hear where things stand. I think you're right, I said. Let's talk about where things stand. I reached into my bag and placed Eleanor's anniversary clock on the table. The glass dome caught the candlelight. The brass pendulum rotated slowly. My daughter went still. Mom's clock, she said. Why? Your mother asked me to keep this safe, I said. She told me it would help me when the time came. She left something inside it. I'd like you to hear it. I pressed the 2 rear corners of the base. The panel opened. I removed the digital recorder and placed it on the white tablecloth between us. My daughter's face had gone pale. I pressed play. Eleanor's voice came first. Clear, steady. Recorded in this same workshop in the weeks before she lost the ability to speak clearly. My daughter made a sound I had never heard from her before. My darling girl, if you are hearing this, it means you have made choices that frightened me long before you made them. I know you. I know what you are capable of when fear and want get the better of your heart. Your father is a good man. He is not an obstacle. He is not a transaction. He is the man who held my hand until I stopped breathing, and he loved us both more completely than either of us deserved. Whatever you have been planning, stop. Come back. Choose differently. There is still time. I am asking you. I am begging you. The recording paused. My daughter was shaking. Mascara ran down her face. Then Tyler's voice filled the room. So what are we doing here? What's the actual plan? And then hers. If something happens, a health event, an accident, the estate transfers automatically. Marcus stood. His chair scraped back hard across the floor. He looked at my daughter for a long moment without speaking. Then he walked to the door and did not look back. Tyler rose and began to say something. I spoke first. Sit down. He sat. Mr. Webb. I kept my voice level. My attorney has a copy of Carl Digges's investigative file. Your photograph, timestamps, and recorded conversation have been provided to the Chatham County DA's office. There is also a civil case being prepared regarding conspiracy to commit fraud and elder abuse. Patrick has advised me that your cooperation will be relevant to how that proceeds. Tyler stared at me. The practiced confidence was gone. What was left underneath it was very young and very frightened. "You should call a lawyer tonight," I said. "I would start with that." He left without another word. My daughter and I sat alone in the private dining room. The anniversary clock turned slowly between us. From Reynolds Square below came the sound of a horse-drawn carriage passing on the cobblestones. "Dad." Her voice was wrecked. Don't explain it yet," I said. "Just listen." She looked at the clock. "Your mother built something with me for 30 years, I said. "Not money, not property. Something real. She worried about you your whole life, not because she doubted you, but because she loved you enough to see clearly. She saw this before you were old enough to have done it. I know." Tears ran freely now. "The trust fund is still intact. 2.1 million. Properly managed, earning interest for 14 years. It is not gone. But you cannot touch it. Not for 5 years. Not unless you can demonstrate to Patrick's satisfaction. Not mine that you have become someone capable of being trusted with it." She looked up. "5 years," I said. "You are 31 years old. You have time. The question is, what you do with it." I reached into my bag and placed a single envelope on the table beside the clock. Inside that envelope is a name and address. A family counselor your mother and I spoke with during her illness. She helped Eleanor say things she needed to say. She helped me hear them. "I would like you to make an appointment." My daughter picked up the envelope with shaking hands. "Dad," she wiped her eyes. "Why are you doing this instead of just, because your mother asked me to give you every possible chance?" I stood, picked up the clock, and began wrapping it carefully. "And because I am not interested in punishing you, I am interested in not losing you entirely." She cried quietly while I packed the bag. I did not rush. At the door, I stopped. "Thursday evenings," I said. "Come to the shop. You'll work with me. We'll restore things. And maybe while we're doing that, you'll remember who you were before all of this." She didn't answer right away. Then, very quietly, "Okay." I walked out into the Savannah night. The square was lit warmly. Live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The old buildings holding their shapes against the dark sky the way they had for 200 years. I walked to my truck and sat with my hands on the steering wheel for a long time. I was not triumphant. I was not relieved. I was the way I felt when I finished a very long and difficult restoration, not proud exactly, but done, finished, able to set down something heavy I had been carrying for too long. Marcus called me the following morning. He had spent the night at a hotel and was looking at an apartment downtown. His voice was quiet but no longer hollow. "George," he said, "I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Did you know it was this bad? When you asked me to be patient, to wait, did you know what she'd said about you?" I thought about the Starland apartment recording, about Tyler's voice asking, "What are we doing here?" About my daughter's voice saying, "If something happens." "Yes," I said. "I knew." He was quiet for a moment. "And you still gave her a chance." "Eleanor would have wanted me to," he exhaled. "I filed, this morning, adultery and fraud. My attorney says she won't contest it." "Good, George." His voice tightened slightly. "You've been more of a father to me than you had any obligation to be. Whatever comes next, I want you to know that." I looked at Eleanor's photograph on my workbench. She was smiling the way she smiled when she found something worth restoring. "You were good to her," I said. "That matters. It'll still matter when this is far enough behind you that you can look at it clearly." "When does that happen?" "Give it time," I said. "It needs as long as it needs." My daughter came on Thursday. She arrived at 6 o'clock in old clothes, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She stood in the doorway of the basement workshop looking at the benches and the shelves and the tools with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was a child sitting at her mother's elbow. Ruth had left a broken mantel clock on the second bench, French, circa 1900, with a cracked enamel dial and a movement that had ceased sometime in the last decade. A simple project for a beginner, something with clear damage and a clear path forward. I handed my daughter a magnifying loupe and a soft cloth and showed her where to start. She worked without speaking for nearly an hour. Her hands were unsteady at first. Slowly they settled. At some point, without either of us planning it, she began to talk. Not about Tyler, not about the estate, about her mother. Small things, the way Eleanor hummed while she worked, the smell of the solvent she used for dial cleaning, the specific sound of the shop at closing time, when Eleanor would put on the kettle and they'd sit together in the display room while the clocks ticked around them. I listened. I kept working. The clock I was reassembling had been apart for 11 years, according to its service record. The mainspring had corroded slightly at the end. I replaced it carefully, tested the tension, set the movement back in its case. I don't know how to fix what I did, my daughter said finally. You're not fixing it, I said. You're rebuilding it. Those are different things. She looked at me. When something's fixed, it goes back to the way it was. I set the movement in its case and reached for the back panel. When something's rebuilt, it becomes something new. You can't undo what happened, but you can become someone different than the person who chose it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and went back to work. At 8 o'clock, I wound the anniversary clock on its shelf. The pendulum began its slow rotation. Eleanor's clock, the clock that had held the letter I didn't understand for 14 years, the clock that had recorded a conversation my daughter didn't know existed, turned gently in the quiet of the workshop. My daughter looked up at it, then at me. She knew, she said. It wasn't a question. She always did. And she still wanted you to give me a chance. She loved you enough to tell the truth about you, I said. That is not a small thing. My daughter turned back to the mantel clock. Her hands were steadier now. I am 64 years old. My wife has been gone for 14 years, and her presence is still in every corner of this building, in the tools she chose, in the restoration methods she developed, in the clock that turns above my workbench and keeps time the way she taught me to keep everything. Carefully, patiently, with attention to what is real. 3 months have passed since the dinner at the old pink house. Tyler Webb moved to Charlotte. The civil case is ongoing. Marcus is building a new life. And he calls me on Sundays, and I am glad of it. My daughter comes every Thursday. She is learning. She breaks things sometimes, and she apologizes, and I show her how to repair the damage, and we keep going. Some weeks, she barely speaks. Other weeks, she fills the workshop with questions about her mother, about the early years, about the things Eleanor said and thought and believed. I answer everything honestly. Eleanor earned that. The trust fund waits. 5 years. My daughter knows what it requires. Not wealth and not luck, but something harder. The daily choice to value people over money, to build instead of take, to stay when staying is difficult. I don't know if she'll get there. I know she's trying. Dorothy Eleanor used to say that every broken piece has memory built into its damage. The cracks show you exactly where the failure happened. And if you study them long enough, they also show you what needs to be changed before the piece can hold together again. My daughter is not a clock, but I have spent my life learning that the principles are the same. Patience, precision, willingness to take something completely apart before you understand how to put it back together. We have time. My name is George Whitfield. I am 64 years old, and I keep a shop full of things that broke before they were brought to me. Every one of them is proof that breaking is not the end of the story. If this reached something in you, drop a 2 in the comments so I know you were here.